It's only a movie. That's what they must be saying in Hollywood after France's defense minister took to Twitter to blast the depiction of his armed forces in the latest Black Panther movie. Whether Sébastien Lecornu is right or wrong to complain about a superhero flick set in a make-believe African country, there is a bit of context we should tell you about. Russia's foreign minister is coming off a barnstorming tour of the continent, which included Mali, where coup leaders have kicked out the French and replaced them with Wagner mercenaries. The same scenario already unfolded in the Central African Republic, and Mali's neighbor Burkina Faso could be next to welcome the Russians. Why did France lose influence so fast in these former colonies? Why is Paris finding it so hard to counter conspiracy theories that include claims of collusion with jihadist insurgents, claims that are blatantly baseless, but which Moscow is only too happy to relay? We'll also ask about the long run. Alliances old and new come and go, but how deep really are the ties that bind Africa to Moscow when you compare with the trade the continent does with the likes of China, Europe, the US, India, Turkey? Today in the France 24 debate, we're looking at that information war that's unfolding in Africa. And we're joined by Nyagare Bakayoko, chair of the African Security Sector Network think tank. Thanks for being with us.
Bonsoir.
We welcome to the show Lova Rinel, associate researcher at the Fondation pour la Recherche Stratégique, the Foundation for Strategic Research, also a think tank. Thanks for being with us. We're joined from Pointe Noire in Congo by Raphaël Parence, researcher at the Foreign Policy Research Institute. Welcome back to the show.
Thank you.
The France 24 debate, where you could join the conversation you have on Facebook and Twitter, hashtag F24debate. Yeah, later we'll show you Russian-made zombie cartoons. First, though, the fuss over the new Black Panther movie. Kathy Kadir Clifford has that story.
In this scene from Wakanda Forever, French soldiers are brought before a UN meeting,
Let our gracious response to this incursion
caught trying to steal resources from the fictional African kingdom of Wakanda.
further attempts on our resources will be considered an act of aggression.
The latest installment of Marvel's Black Panther franchise is under the diplomatic spotlight after French Defense Minister Sébastien Lecornu condemned its portrayal of French troops on Twitter, responding to a clip posted by a journalist.
I strongly condemn this false and deceptive representation of our armed forces. I am thinking of and honoring the 58 French soldiers who died defending Mali at its request in the face of Islamist terrorist groups.
Whilst on a secret mission in Mali, the fictional French soldiers are dressed like France's real-life Barkhane troops, which were operating in the country until 2022. It comes as France's image in Western Africa has suffered, with Russian influence in the region increasing. In recent months, military juntas in Mali and Burkina Faso demanded the departure of French troops, deployed to the Sahel region since 2013 to fight Islamist extremist groups. Paris says Mali then called on Russia's Wagner mercenary group to reinforce its army, which the military junta denies. There's been speculation Burkina Faso may do the same. The Defense Ministry says France is not calling for the withdrawal or censorship of a work of art.
Nyagare Bakayoko, did the French defense minister do the right thing in speaking out?
I'm not sure because, this kind of caricature of military is not new in the cinema industry. For instance, I'm not sure that each time Russian, Chinese, Arabic militaries are portrayed in any movie, there are complaints from their own ministries of defense. So I'm not sure about the relevance of such an intervention. But beyond this, I would say that what this episode is showing is the fact that the very bad image that France is suffering from presently is going much far beyond the Russia or Africa, because here we are just talking about an American movie produced by Disney, which is far from being a former Soviet actor or a Wagner-sponsored actor. So that is where things are very worrying for France itself.
So France is doing something wrong.
We can say that the security and foreign policy in Africa, as conducted by France presently, is growingly badly perceived both by African elites and African civil society and public opinions. And we can see that it is also deteriorating among other foreign actors.
Lovarina, your think tank, it focuses on defense issues. There are former officers among your colleagues. What was the reaction around the water cooler or the coffee machine after this tweet by the defense minister?
You're right. It's the coffee machine. That is very important. You know, you're right, because I think that our minister, I won't say it's a mistake, but it's not his position to respond to a movie. We are in democracy. We respect the freedom of speech, and it's a movie. So I'm French, and I think that this episode just show up how in France the situation in Mali, the Barkhane situation, is very
touchy.
Yes. I think we have to understand that the minister at this moment talk to his soldiers, talk to the population, say, no, we defend the militaries, and we not accept that in a movie, at this moment, we are shown as, bad guy who plunder in the Black Panther was vibranium, I think, but it's gold, I think, that they want to say. But the minister, he made a little mistake, because you don't say, but the tweet, it was from a journalist, a far-right journalist, who just relay something else. That Africa, it's our old colony, and we have a problem of the French-Africa relation. And I think it's the main, the real topics of this situation. Don't forget that 2 years ago now, the President Macron made a huge summit about how the new relationship with Africa will be led, and now we still wonder and accept exactly what we want from Africa.
Yeah, that summit that you're alluding to, the one in Pau in southwestern France, it was back in early 2020. The French president hosting what's called the G5 Sahel, leaders from that band of countries that border the Sahara Desert in West Africa. African diplomats at the time quipping it felt like they were being summoned by the colonial power. Emmanuel Macron had called for his counterparts to clarify their intentions when it came to France's presence before that summit, and he later called for rapid results in the fight against insurgents. You're saying France has a messaging problem when it comes to Africa.
Yes, because we have to deal with more than 2,000 years of history with Africa. And we have maybe the President Macron decided to deal with it in 5 years. It's not possible. And I think that the main preoccupation that we have to focus on is not what Russia do or America or China, because it's not only Russia in Africa. It's what France wants with Africa. And until now, we still don't know. And this is a huge problem, because we want to change our relation. It's a question of military position. It's a question of, our development program capacity to change population's life. And it's, we can say it's like, I won't say a mistake or something who doesn't work, but I think that Africa and population in Africa is like disappointed with France relation, and they want to change, and they are waiting for something new. But this new is, even for us French people, we are waiting to, okay, what kind of relation we want? And this is the question.
All right, I'll take the bait from what you're saying and put it to Raphaël Parence here. What Emmanuel Macron promised, and he is the first French president who's born after the independence of France's former colonies in Africa. What he promised at the outset of his first term, and he made that first trip to Burkina Faso where he met with university students, was that there would be work done on the past, on memorial. There's two issues here, aren't there? There's on the one hand, France's own relationship with Africa, and on the other, its rivalry with Russia.
Yes, I mean, the two issues I think are really intertwined because they're both, a question of the security situation in several of these countries across the Sahel. It's a question of resources and it's a question of capabilities. If France hasn't been able to accomplish the goals that they've set out to accomplish in defeating insurgencies in these countries, it's not exactly surprising that these Sahelian would turn elsewhere.
Raphaël, when you hear Le Varinel ask what is Emmanuel Macron, what is France's new direction when it comes to Africa, what would you answer?
It's a very good question. I think the new direction has to be more streamlined and also with more purpose. I think it's critically figuring out what the issues are in the sort of security cooperation approach that exists today, how it's not working, why it's not working in these countries, and also countering the misinformation and disinformation piece, especially as it relates to Wagner and to Russia in general.
And what do you do when you're the French government and your allies in taking on in jihadist insurgencies? You mentioned how security is the issue. They keep changing, what with coup after coup in places like Mali, Burkina Faso, and to the periphery of all that, Guinea now.
Yes, I think that's the $1 million question. I don't know if the West has, or really anyone has figured out the response to jihadism, to counterterrorism. I mean, if you look at Iraq and Afghanistan, I think you have many more examples of places where this hasn't been, Western responses haven't been completely successful. I don't know if I know what the answer is today.
Negele Bakayoko?
I would try to answer both of your questions very quickly. First, regarding what does France want to do in Africa, what is very clear is that he wants to stay committed on the continent. That is something which is with no doubt.
And it still has allies who want it to stay committed. I'm thinking of places like Ivory Coast.
I'm not sure that maybe, but
certainly their leaders.
Exactly, their leaders, their public opinion. It might be tricky because if you remember well, the situation and the perception of French in Ivory Coast at the beginning of 2000 was very difficult, and there was such kind of hate against French that can be reactivated, in fact, very easily. But what is making very difficult to explain what France is looking for presently is the fact that its policy is completely impossible to read. It's very difficult to understand the reason why there is support to a coup leader in Chad, because that is what is at stake. We had an unconstitutional change of regime in Chad, whilst there is such bad relation with Mali, for instance. And also, it's very hard to understand why France is trying to connect with civil society organization.
But
and
it's not.
Also
it's not just France, by the way. I mean, Mali and Burkina Faso suspended by regional and continental bodies.
Yes, but the support to Chad is so visible with France only. And when the next tour of President Macron in Africa is announced to go to Congo-Brazzaville, to Gabon, it is a very bad signal to those supporting an oriented, democratic French foreign policy.
I think you get the point, because a relation is between two persons. It's not only France. You understand what I mean? It's not say, I'm France and I decide to have this kind of relation. Exactly. You have to discuss with the other side. And for Ivory Coast, Ouattara, I think he wants to keep this relation with France. Maybe his population is different. Exactly. What you have in the city is different what you have in the suburb. So we can't say that the hate in Africa, it's all around Africa. It's not true. It's only in the city. Because even me, I come from Madagascar. The relation now in France, between France and Madagascar, it's a little bit complicated. But 5 years ago, it was very good. And maybe in 5 years, it will be better. So I think the first mistake is to think that the relation is stuck now, and the picture that we have today will be the same in a few years. The second point, just to finish, you talked about the coup and the democracy, but they are the former president. We have the security issues. What will be the right position as France, leader of security, to do? It's not to say, okay, you're not a democracy, I'm not talking with you, but I'm able to talk with Arabia Saudite. It's not possible. So I think we have this population willing to say we need a democracy, and it's complicated. And we are waiting for France to change that the things doesn't work in the African country. It's not the role of France to change what happened in Africa.
What we've certainly seen is that Russia has exploited that sentiment that Nyagale was talking about. And we saw after last year's pullout of French troops from Mali, now it's some 400 French special forces that'll soon be pulling out of neighboring Burkina Faso by the end of the month. Paris recalling its ambassador in January. Ties with 34-year-old coup leader Ibrahim Traoré are strained. They're not severed. Still, the French redeploying to Niger and to Chad, which you mentioned. And there was this feeling, Raphaël Parence, that it's kind of like this domino effect last month when we heard about first Mali. First it was, the Central African Republic, where Wagner stepped in as the French pulled out. Then it was Mali, and now there's the feeling that the other shoe is going to drop in Burkina Faso.
Yes, I definitely agree. I mean, I've been saying this since last year that Burkina Faso might be next. It was discussed before the first coup. Apparently, that was the last conversation between the coup leader and the former president about Wagner coming into Burkina. And now, the question, it just comes back to resources and the ability to defend the country. If French troops are no longer present, who does the government turn to? Is it Russia? Is it a different mercenary force? That's always a possibility, but Wagner is the most likely outcome at this point.
Yeah, France's biggest problem in Africa isn't Hollywood blockbusters, but cartoons spread over social media by the Russian mercenaries of Wagner.
A 12 ans de renfort, mon ami.
So, Lovarinal, how effective are and there are other ones, this isn't the only one. How effective are they, these cartoons?
It's not the first time I see those cartoons, but this time it makes me laugh a little because it's too...
For you, but is it effective?
I don't think so, because I think that it's obvious that it's a propaganda cartoon. So I believe that African people can make the difference between propaganda and, I won't say, influence. But what is true that, as we said just before, that there is a feeling, a huge feeling against France, and they surf with it. And this kind of cartoons just try to increase this feeling and maybe to provoke riots against France. Don't forget that when Burkina Faso made this coup, there is the French embassy was a target for the people. So for me, it's a question of security first, and the question is, what France do to counter this cartoon? And this is another question, because France does want, and I hope, won't make a cartoon against Russia.
Because there is a precedent for this, Niagare Bakayoko. A couple of years back, because there were all these Russian troll accounts on Facebook, the French had a clumsy attempt of countering them, and Facebook called out both Moscow and Paris.
I am not sure that French should use the same kind of methods that authoritarian countries, such as Russia, because it is today the challenge of a country like France is to find a way to answer this kind of informational attacks by respecting transparency, rule of law, and democracy.
So what's effective? What's an effective way of countering cartoons like the one we just saw?
I think it will take time. I don't think that an immediate answer can be brought. In my view, there is a need to first understand where this anger against France is coming from. And I'm not sure that the analysis, the real deep analysis has been done, because most of the time you can hear French authorities saying that yes, everything in fact is manipulated by Russia, and we do not have any problems with Africans. But no, this is definitely not the case. So there is a need to understand exactly what are the sources of such a feeling. And secondly, I also do think that there is a need to reconnect with a number of African actors, such as local medias, for instance. We can see that the French communication strategy most of the time is targeting media such as France 24, such as RFI or international medias. But there is also a need to be much more connected with local medias, including those broadcasting in local languages. I think it might be a new approach, which might be less visible and less efficient immediately than this kind of cartoons. But over the long run, I think it could show much more efficient results, in fact.
Raphaël Parence, what does effective messaging look like where you're sitting in Congo?
I think effective messaging involves responding to this in a way that doesn't infantilize Africans. I think these cartoons are very much reflect the way that Wagner in Russia does business. In a lot of these countries, it's elite capture and supporting liberal regimes against popular opinion and popular ideals. I think good responses would be mature, showing infographics about, maybe Russian campaigns in Africa, casualty counts, killings of civilians, increased conflict in Mali, CAR, et cetera, and also showing the failures of Wagner and Russia, particularly in Mozambique.
There have been plenty of failures. You mentioned Mozambique, Lovarinel, Wagner, which had to leave with its tail between its legs there. We're hearing fresh reports again this week of atrocities taking place in Mali. I don't know if the Wagner mercenaries were involved in the latest attack that took place near the city of Ségou. That effective messaging, how not to infantilize the citizens of these nations. How do you go about it?
It's very complicated because, as you said just before, we are stuck. So just give this cartoon. It's like, an instant feeling. And as a democracy, we can respond and find and give the same message, meaning that I think the main challenge for France is to find the right way, the right country first to practice this new relation and give the new message. And I think the problem is still the same thing. What message France wants to give to African people? It's more African people than the people in position. And because we know that with some president, President Macron get on well. There is no problem. But the population, each time, just remember during the COVID, just after the COVID, all the manifestations against, anger, and they say, it's France, it's always France. And I think that the priority for France, it's, for me, not to be focused on what Wagner and Russia do, because, as I said, there is Turkish, China, America. They all try to have their own influence in Africa. So, to be honest, it's a question of concurrence.
Absolutely.
It's a question of competition.
Yes.
Of course, there is the context of the war in Ukraine, which is
exactly.
a big part of why we're even talking about this
Yes.
today. And that is important. And the Kremlin is looking for allies. It's going big on the next Russia-Africa summit that's scheduled for July in St. Petersburg. At a televised cabinet meeting on Monday, Vladimir Putin introducing his foreign minister with great pomp and entrusting Sergei Lavrov with a brief. After his recent tour of the continent, Sergei Lavrov, who addressed the Russian parliament this Wednesday.
Our renewed foreign policy concept will focus on the need to end the monopoly of the West on shaping the framework of international life, which should be formed by a balance of interests, as the United Nations Charter demands, enshrining the principle of the sovereign equality of all states.
Shaping the framework of international life. What do you read into that, Raphaël Parence?
I wouldn't say it's so grand for Russia. I think they've often, in this case, run out of allies, and they're turning under every rock and every stone to find new partners, whether that's security partners, partners to take their oil exports, to take their grain exports that are languishing due to sanctions. I think it's more of a demand for assistance than anything else.
A demand for assistance?
Yes, sir.
A demand for assistance from whom?
From Africa in general. I think just trying to find new partners in places that they haven't found them before.
And there are those who make the argument, I'll read you what one think tanker has said, that Russia's chosen the politics first course in which economic preferences are a natural consequence of successful political cooperation. Politics first for the Russians, Niagare Bakayoko. This is the Financial Times quoting one analyst saying, and in exchange, these African leaders have a friend who's a permanent member of the Security Council.
Yes, but I think what is very important is to realize the fact that, in fact, Africa has been developing lots of different partnerships along all the 20 past years, I might say. Everybody is focusing on this forthcoming summit in Russia, but there have just been other fora with India. Israel also is back on the continent, and I think that what is at stake today is the influence of non-Western actors over the global international system. Not only with African, but the kind of relation which have been developed between all those countries outside of the traditional relations between Africa and Europe have been completely overlooked. And that is what is being so evident today, and to what France has to find some answers more than to Russia per se, in my view.
All right, let's take a look at some numbers for the oil, for all the oil, gas, and weapons, and also grains that Russia exports. Its trade with Africa comes in at a paltry 18th position, according to UN statistics compiled last year by the Economist Intelligence Unit. So you see I think Russia, according to those statistics, it's 1/10 the exports that China has, for instance. Is it a zero-sum game? You trade with one instead of the other, or does it matter if there are more partners, as you mentioned, the list of them on the continent?
No, in my view, it is a way to diversify the different partners. Some might be more important in economical terms, other from normative or political perspectives. That's very important to understand the fact that today African leaders and population are trying to have a multi-dimensional partnerships developed with different kind of actors, each of them investing in different kind of sector.
Lovarinel, because there are more players on the continent,
yes,
that doesn't
I think
mean
it's a little bit different because I think that Africa, if they're diversifying their partners, because they are running, they chase for money, for cash money, to develop the country. With Europe, you have to wait maybe sometime more than 5 years to have, the money from your investment. It's not possible for a country who have problems with health, education, mining, and everything. So if they diversify, it's not because they are looking for a geostrategic position, because they chase for money and cash to practice their policy. And this is one problem that all of those Western countries, they take a long time to be concrete for people. And for policy. First. The second one for Russia. I think that Lavrov, when he made his tour in Africa, it's because of Ukraine. Because now, for European people, he seems to be alone. And I think that for him, he just knocked on each door of Africa to find countries to say, please, be with us in the United Nations, vote with our position, and we will help you. But don't forget that, with Mali, Putin called, Assimi Goïta. He promised two things.
The head of the junta.
Yes, exactly. He said, you will be my host for the Russie-Afrique summit. And he promised, les Anglais, I forget the words,
Fertilizer.
Yes, we're still waiting for it. Mm-mm. And Russia is always like this. Don't forget that the first summit, Rosatom made 5 contracts with Africa. We are waiting for the nuclear central in Africa until now. Only Egypt who opened his first test reactor. But I remember that 10 countries signed with Russia, but there is no concrete thing. So I think that Africa will surprise us because they will always find concrete partner to develop the real project.
Raphaël Parence, any sign of the Russians where you are?
I can't speak to that particularly. I mean, there's obviously economic involvement here in Congo, but the biggest partner is France, and the second biggest partner, I guess there's some debate, is China, and they have been for a long time, and presumably they will be into the future.
Yeah, where Russia does reign in trade is arms exports, thanks not only to those easy-to-use and durable Kalashnikov rifles, but to other types of heavy weaponry. Now, there you see, it's interesting when you look at this map, Negere Bakayoko, because, and again, we're looking at this, you can look at this map with an eye towards the war in Ukraine as well. Algeria, by far, the biggest recipient of those arms imports from Russia. Algeria, which is all in on the side of the Russians when it comes to the war in Ukraine.
Yes, but another interesting country is Niger, where France is very involved because most of the troops of former Barkhane operation moved to Niger, and still Russia stays the first partners in terms of armament of Niger, as well as Turkey, which cannot be seen as an ally of Western actors per se. So here again, I think it would be very interesting to look at the kind of partnership. For instance, you can see Angola. Angola is also an important partner increasingly of France.
Right.
For instance, President Macron will travel there. So I think it does confirm that African countries, yes, that's true, they are looking for assistance, but there are also political actors which are also able to promote their own interests and not only depending on what other partner can provide to them.
Yeah, you mentioned Emmanuel Macron and Angola. Macron, who last time around went to South Africa, and by the way, spotted in the port of Cape Town earlier this week the Admiral Gorshkov. That's a Russian frigate due to take part in joint naval exercises with South Africa that start this coming Friday. The exercise is dubbed Mosi, which means smoke in the local Tswana language. Scheduled off the port cities of Durban and Richards Bay. And there, how do you look at this? How does Paris look at this, Le Varinel? Is this just, because of the historical ties, like Angola has historical ties with the Soviet Union, historical ties because the Soviets backed the ANC and the struggle against apartheid? Is this something to be shrugged off, or were those people who demonstrated, and there were demonstrations when Lavrov visited South Africa last month?
Yes, it's a demonstration, but we celebrate the first year of the Ukraine's war, so the chosen day is very interesting. First, second one,
they'll be in the middle of those maneuvers on February the 24th.
Yes, and second one, don't forget that it's not the first time that Russia and China
as
yes,
well.
made a common military drill with South Africa. The first one was in 2019, and we had the Tupolev, the nuclear air force from Russia who came in South Africa. So Russia, as I said, in the new deterrence doctrine, they said that they changed in 2020 their doctrine, and they say, we open and we will make a nuclear attack if our allies will be attacked. And now they are trying to, to show that they have allies. And South Africa have a specific story with Russia. But the question is, South Africa needs protection from Russia. I don't think so. But they need to show that South Africa is not alone. Don't forget that we have the BRICS, so Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. It's, I think it's, I won't say a revival of the non-aligned movements, but it's, for South Africa, I lived in Madagascar, and South Africa was very hard against Western country, against France, and say we need to be out of this system. And to stay with Russia, it's a way to resist. It's a question of a real storytelling of this Africa that we may be in through Black Panther, movie. But there is South Africa wants to keep the African dream, and this African dream is a question of independence with the question of colonization, meaning that all the black people in Africa need to be together against the threat of the colonization. And I think that what the diplomacy of South Africa now is to keep this story and to find solution with Russia, because now with France it's complicated. With as I said, United States of America wants to come in Africa, and they don't appreciate it. So this military drill is to interpret as for South Africa a way to exist and say, if you come in Africa, you have to discuss with us first. And don't forget that South Africa since 20 years now requests a seat in the Security Council, and we are waiting for it.
A permanent seat, yeah,
yes.
A permanent seat for the continent. Raphaël Parens, you heard there Le Varinel allude to that club of emerging powers that was so popular more than a decade ago, the BRICS, and South Africa being the S in that BRICS acronym. If the war in Ukraine, and that's the forecast, gets uglier and uglier, will those BRICS nations still be sitting the fence? We know it's the case for the likes of Brazil and India right now.
I think that's a very difficult question to answer at this point in time. Whether they will maintain an actual neutrality or a studied neutrality where they're involved economically supporting one side or the other, that would seem more likely to me in the future as the conflict continues and as Russia and the United States and Western Europe, obviously Ukraine, put pressure on them to become more involved. I think there will be economic involvement.
What do you make, Nagere Bakayoko, the optics of South Africa staging these joint naval exercises on February the 24th? They'll still be happening on the first anniversary of Russia's invasion of Ukraine.
No, of course, it will be seen as a show of force, for sure. But I'm not sure it has to be seen as something new. As was just mentioned, this kind of drills were conducted long before. So, once again, I definitely think that there is a need to review the way we have been considering non-Western relationships with the African continent. This shows that those relationships are very deep and historically have been very long, which explains the reason why they are so strong, in fact.
Before we go, Nagere Bakayoko, let me ask you, going forward now, what can France do to mend its relations with the leaders of countries like Mali and Burkina Faso?
I think that presently the only option is low profile. And it is, in fact, what is beginning to happen because the relations are so tense, in particular with public opinions, more than with leaders, that there is no way other than being very discreet and not to have such an aggressive communication policy as was conducted in the past 10 years.
Le Varinel, the French president's into his second mandate. Does he understand Africa better than when he was first elected in 2017?
I'm not in his head, but I think that Africa is very important for this kind of.
Because every French president gets elected says, "Oh, la France-Afrique," that cozy relationship is over, and then they wind up.
No, for me, it was he wanted to make it over. To say stop. Don't forget, for France-Afrique, it's a question of a private society. We don't have as before. It changed. I don't say it's perfect. I don't say it's stopped. I don't say that Total it's a good partner. I say that the relationship from the French power, the French institution with the French cooperation in Africa is different now. But I think that President Macron, with Mali and Burkina Faso, wants to say, okay, enough. They have to make his own story with their own partner. They are free. And I say, as a president, maybe get more closer with other countries, English countries in Africa. So it's, for me...
and we've seen strong words from the likes of Ghana against Burkina Faso.
Yes, it's because this region is complicated. We just say as Ghana, Burkina Faso, Ivory Coast, but it's a region. They work together. So what's happened in Burkina Faso? There is consequences in Ivory Coast. It's not, it's not separated. And for Africa, what's happened in the West countries it's complicated for them. So I think that African country wants and requests a lot from France in one hand. In other hand, they say we don't need France anymore. This balance is complicated to maintain. So I think that the challenge for France and for the President Macron is to find the right channel. I mean, more to be more focused on the population, less than to the people in the power. Focus on civil society, focus on development, private development, and not who win the election. I came 3 days after the election because it's all we feel that the president wants to keep his relation with the president. It's not a good sign for African population.
All right, so keep more of an eye out for those that are beyond the walls of the presidential palaces. Lovarina, that will be the last word for now. I want to thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank Negele Bakayoko from Pointe-Noire, Raphaël Parence for being with us here in the France 24 debate. All right, please stay.